Yeah, you don't have to.
About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be. Life with no distractions, we'll get away. This is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with me. Be free. Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Afternoon, everyone. Jim here. Welcome to our regular 4:30 slot on a Monday for some live A-level politics revision. And every other week we do a sort of content or topic focused session, and we are back to our ideologies. And today is the first of the non-core ideologies, and we're looking at feminism. And joining us live from Yorkshire is Duncan, and live from Phoenix, Arizona is Kira.
Hello.
I always like to say Phoenix, Arizona, just to make Duncan feel as though he really ought to be somewhere else.
Yeah, I could do with the fan here as well because it's very warm in Yorkshire today.
Welcome everybody who's joining
Yorkshire.
us live. It's great to see you, Kira. Many thanks as always. I know you've got a very busy schedule in the US for this term. Looking forward to you coming back. But it's great for you to
Yeah.
join us up early in Phoenix. And we have quite a lot of students joining us live. We had about 300 students who watched the catch-up stroke replay session for each of the last 2 weeks. So if you're watching on replay, welcome to. We've got about 30 minutes or so of activities and revision, and also some exam technique in terms of how to structure responses to the ideologies questions. So about 30, 35 minutes or so with Duncan and Kira. I think we're good to go. Is there anything we need to say, Duncan, before we start? Who's kicking off tonight?
I'm going to make a start with a activity on a timeline activity to get us cracking. But first of all, just a little bit of exam gold, which Kira is going to tell you much more about as we go through. Make sure in your answers you refer to key thinkers, you compare the strands, and you reach a judgment, have an opinion, and follow that through. But we'll hear a lot more about that in the activities later in the session. But if we make a start with a timeline activity. Now, as I've mentioned with some of the other core ideologies, if you've joined us for those sessions, you don't necessarily need to know exactly when people were born and when they died, etc., as we have on the list here. But what it is useful to know is whereabouts in the story of the ideology people come. And when we talk about feminism, we often talk about waves of feminism, and we sort of think about feminism in different time periods. So it is useful to know who came when and whether someone was writing after someone else. Now, I think this is quite a tricky task this time to do this timeline. If you're watching live, what I want you to do is put the numbers in order. So basically, the correct order in terms of their years. So the A to F is in order. Can you put the numbers, the different feminist key thinkers in order? I think this is quite tricky because it's over a shorter period of time than we've had with a lot of the other ideologies. We're less than 100 years between the birth dates of of all of them. We've added one person in there who is not a feminist key thinker on the spec. Betty Friedan is on the spec, but as a liberal key thinker. But we've included her as well. Okay, can you get them in order? What do you reckon? Can you work out who's the first? Maybe it'll be easier to work out who are the later ones. We've got a couple there who are still with us, which is always useful to work, perhaps help us work it out. If you know roughly when people were writing, you might be able to work out the order. Okay, so those of you watching live, what do you reckon? What order are we going to go in? You can either try and work it all out and type it all in, or you can start going and think, who do you think's first? Who do you think's last? Feel free to type in whatever you like into that chat window in relation to how you want to order these. Who's our earliest one? 1860 to 1935. Any thoughts? Who's our latest one? 1952. Just a quick point there that it isn't a typo that Bell Hooks hasn't got capital letters. That is how she writes her name. Any thoughts? Anyone going to suggest something? Or shall we have a look at the completed solution and chat through it? I think we better have a look. Let's see. Okay, so Charlotte Perkins Gilman was our first one from 1860 to 1935. Then we've got Simone de Beauvoir, 1908 to 1986. Well done, Lucy. Got Charlotte as being the first one. Then we've got Betty Friedan, 1921 to 2006. We might remember her years from when we did liberalism a few weeks ago now. Kate Millett, 1934 to 2017. Sheila Rowbottom has just brought out memoirs, actually, worth having a look at. 1943, she was born, and Bell Hooks was born in 1952. Okay, and as I say, it is useful to know roughly when people were writing, thinking about these different waves of feminism and the different strands of feminism, with the kind of more liberal feminism earlier on through to your sort of intersectional feminism in more recent times, with various points in between. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Kira now.
Okay, so what I want us to kind of think about now is the different strands of feminism. So the spec kind of divides them into 4 strands. So liberal feminism, socialist feminism, radical feminism, and postmodern feminism. Although I think intersectional feminism is a kind of a more used term, but the spec calls it postmodern. But you can use either term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put like a word on the screen, and you have to write down in the chat which strand of feminism do you think it could be. So for the first one then, if we're thinking about I ruined this by accident. Whoops. For the first one, if we're thinking about the idea of intersectionality. Which strand of feminism is talks about intersectionality? Is it socialist feminism or is it postmodern feminism?
I just don't know.
It's just absolutely clueless, right? Was anybody listening to me? That's the question.
Any
So I'd
ideas?
say one. Yeah, any ideas? One of these strands is definitely not about intersectionality. It's about just one division in society, which they believe trumps all divisions in societies. And well done, Ahmed. So the correct answer is postmodern feminism. So for
I,
socialism, it's all about class. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I suppose in a way you could say socialist feminism, although they wouldn't use the term, or they didn't at the time use the term intersectionality. I guess they were talking about class and gender, and so there was a sort of intersectional element to it in that respect. But yes, it is definitely a postmodern idea. Mm-hmm. Are you still with us, Kira? I currently can't hear Kira, so I'm going to ask the question. I apologise if I'm speaking over.
Yeah, it looks like Kira's lines has been lost briefly, Duncan. So yeah,
Okay,
keep going.
all
Mate.
right.
Yeah.
I'll ask this question then. So, which of these would think that legislative reform can address gender inequality? Is it radical feminists or liberal feminists? Which do you think? Any suggestions? Radical
And I
feminists?
think Kira is now back with us.
Oh, excellent. Okay. We've asked the question. We're just waiting for a couple of answers. Oh, Jasmine has come in with liberal and Lucy. Shall we have a look? See which one of those is right. Yeah, well done. So those of you who said liberal feminism, you are absolutely right. Okay.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
It's maybe the socialists were out to get me after not being fair. Okay. So, which strand of feminism talks about patriarchy stemming from capitalism? So, the origins of patriarchy is from capitalism. Which strand of feminism would say that? So, then if you remove capitalism in the pure form of this ideology, then we would see a society without patriarchy. And yet, Lucy, perfect again. So the correct answer is socialist feminism. So for them, capitalism is the core. So Engels talks about it as capitalism, and Marx as well, leading to the world historic defeat of the female sex, as if there was never any sexism that kind of existed before that. So you get rid of capitalism, and all women will be equal in society, in the purest form of the ideology. Okay, so the next one. The personal is the political. Which strand of feminism would argue that? Liberal or radical feminism? So essentially, it's not just about political change, it's also about addressing things that are personal. So things such as the home, readdressing things like gender roles, like who cleans, who looks after children, as well of course, liberation through sex as well, and the kind of implications of patriarchy in the bedroom too, between heterosexual relationships. Okay, so Lucy, perfect. Marta as well, fantastic. Yeah, the correct answer is radical feminism. So radical kind of has a negative meaning, I think, in some people's eyes, which is like, oh, it's too extreme. But what radical means, and it's the same with being a radical generally in politics, is about realizing that there's systemic issues in society, and society needs a radical shift in order to kind of become address these inequalities that exist. So really good answers. Okay, so the next one. Culture promotes male dominance. Which strand of feminism argues this? A culture just essentially leads to the dominance of men in society. So by culture, it's things like magazines, music, movies in Hollywood. So which strand would argue that? That essentially the male dominance is so pervasive in society, it's reinforced through the things that we consume in terms of entertainment. Okay,
Gone a
so
bit quiet on this one, haven't they?
Yeah, I think this one's a bit more specific, isn't it? So it's maybe a bit harder. But it was the thinker who argued for it was Kate Millett. She writes a really
Mm.
beautiful piece of work where she addresses the dominance of patriarchy through male culture. So maybe which type of feminist is Kate Millett? Well done, Marta. Perfect. She was a radical feminist. So radical feminism argues this, and it's going back to the heart of that issue that it's not just done through laws. It's done. It's a lot more pervasive in society. It's through everything that exists in society. So we need to address patriarchy. And see radical change rather than just small reforms, as liberals would argue. Okay, so
We've got a question type here. Hopefully, Kira will be joining us again in a moment. I think I'm having a little bit of trouble with the internet access, maybe. We've got a question, and very similar to the core ideologies questions that we looked at previously. There are various things that could be asked, but it will generally be along the lines of to what extent do feminists agree on, and they might mention specific strands of feminism or all of them. And it'll be to what extent do they agree on, and then it might be some of these key themes: human nature, state, society, economy, which are the ones we talk about for all the core and non-core ideologies, or it might be about some of the key core principles of the ideology, such as sex and gender, patriarchy, the idea that the personal is political, intersectionality. I've also seen ones on about the extent to which men and women are essentially different, or so that kind of equality versus difference feminism type debate as well. Okay, so there's lots there that could be asked, and we've got a question here: to what extent do feminists agree about society? Let me think about how could we go about trying to answer that question. And we could look at liberal feminism as half of that argument. There's one side of the argument. Think about what the liberal feminists have to say about that. That sounds promising that Kira might be back. So
I'm so sorry about that. I
that's
think it's
okay.
the issues of doing a call in the desert. But okay. So sorry, should I go on again?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
So yes.
So I was just saying, we'd just started looking at this question: to what extent do feminists agree about society? And we just said that we could start talking about liberal feminism. I've not said anything beyond that. So
Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that. Okay,
that's right.
so you'll see that Friedan is not a key thinker, and sometimes it's quite political the way specifications are constructed. So the spec decided to put Betty Friedan inside liberalism rather than inside feminism. So that doesn't mean that you can't use her as a key thinker. Remember, you only have to use two key thinkers to hit that kind of requirement inside the mark scheme. So if you want to exemplify liberal feminism, which you have to do, if you want to actually write a good question, you have to have some evidence that liberals believe something, then you do have to use Friedan when putting forward her ideas about feminism, about society, human nature, and so forth. So she's not a key thinker. So remember, when you use her, you've not hit your two key thinker requirements. But I really would encourage using her because she talks about society. She talks about the idea of going through legal reform, partly because she was pragmatic and she wanted to actually see some change and some change in legislation. So she talks about reforming in terms of the public sphere rather than the private sphere. So society doesn't need to change, more so laws need to change so women can have access to things like the job market. In terms of socialist feminism, that would see a radical disagreement with liberal feminism. So Robotham would talk more so about the ideas that society needs to be radically restructured in order to have a socialist revolution, and then within that socialist revolution have another revolution which talks about women's rights. So riding off of the socialist revolution, and from there essentially having a feminist revolution within the new socialist society. So constructing a fair society through socialism. And then the other kind of disagreement would be Millet. So this radical feminism is interesting because it does overlap with socialist feminism a lot. But essentially, to Millet and some feminists, they would argue that society needs to be radically overthrown to overthrow male dominance through culture, because they dominate not just politics but society too. So radical divergence between liberal feminism. But also, Millett would argue, and some feminists would argue, that in some ways, actually, you need to have a society without men, because patriarchy is so embedded that the only way to kind of be liberated is to live in kind of women only spaces in some degree. But that's kind of like a more radical form of it. And I think Millett was probably more pragmatic than that. And then the last kind of version of feminism is postmodern or intersectional feminism. And this is really advocated very strongly by Bell Hooks, who talks about society not just as simply as a division, as radical feminism would argue, between gender, and that the only kind of oppression is gender oppression. But Hooks argues about intersectionality, saying that women experience society differently based on things like their race and their social class and their sexuality, things like their abilities as well. So, what Hooks argues is that there's a society which kind of looks to liberate the worst off in society so that they have an equality rather than just focusing on women, because that tended to lead to freedom for white women rather than all women. So, there's some key overlap in the sense that they see that society is unfair and it needs to be addressed to create a better society for women, but they kind of differ on how far do they go in that reform. Is it as simple as radical feminism says and removing patriarchal oppression? Is it as socialists say and saying, oh, let's actually just remove class oppression and then deal with the women question? Or is it as liberals say, oh, we need to just essentially just make changes so that women can go to work and then we'll see societal change? So when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about, okay, what are the kind of different arguments for them agreeing and disagreeing? So if we're to kind of consider their views on the economy, which not necessarily explicitly talking about like an economic theory like Keynesianism or something like that we see in liberalism, but we do see their different views on the economy. And I found this quite difficult sometimes when you think about how do they agree, because there's four strands, right? So there's a lot more diversity in these opinions, but you can think maybe two strands might agree rather than all four. So can you think and write down in the chat two arguments to support the view that feminists agree on the economy, that they have common ground in how the economy should look or how the economy oppresses women? Can we think about two reasons at least?
This is a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can
I
think
think
of
if
a couple
we
of things.
go on.
I
Yeah.
can think of a couple of things more on the how they agree about what's wrong with the economy now, more so than how to improve it or what a good economy would look like.
I think that's definitely a good route to go down. And I think definitely with your start, it's good to think about not just the solution to oppression,
Yeah.
but also the causes of it, because
Mm.
how you define the causes of oppression will influence your solution. So if women are only oppressed through the economy, then you just need economic change. If it's more than that, then you need to think about societal change too. I think Gilman is a really good thinker as well for talking about the economy. And, you know, sometimes I kind of thought maybe she was supposed to be the liberal thinker for feminism, but when you look at her views on the
Yeah.
economy, they're very socialist.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, because also, you know, quite what position is the strand? They don't quite fit with the strands, do they? You know, like what Simone de Beauvoir, is she a, you know, she was a socialist. Was she a but
Mm.
was she a socialist feminist, or was she, you know, was she a liberal feminist? Was she a radical feminist? They don't quite sort of perfectly fit with the strands, any of them, and to a certain extent, apart from perhaps Kate Millett and Bell Hooks would be the closest matches. Oh, no,
Yeah,
sorry, and Sheila Rowbottom as
yeah.
well is definitely a socialist feminist, but
Yeah, she's the best
yeah,
fit, actually, isn't she?
yeah,
She's the
yeah,
clearest one. Yeah, because
mm,
it's kind of the views of Gilman on maybe society were more liberal.
mhm,
She was very much writing as a white woman from a higher class,
mm,
but then her views on the economy were very much about redistribution in order to create more fairness, which is a very socialist kind of idea. And I think maybe the thing is they don't really think of themselves in those terms.
no,
So it's hard to try and label them in that way. But
Sure.
we do it because we have to. Okay, so in terms of agree then, so women are excluded from the economy. So obviously women don't have access to jobs in the same way that men do. Women face sexual discrimination in terms of getting a job, and then after, even when they get the job, they'll be passed up for promotions, which means that they end up becoming economically dependent on men because men earn more. So when the question of childcare pops up, who's going to stay at home and look after the child, the question will be, well, who earns more? Sorry, love, you earn more, you stay home. And that's essentially what feminists would argue. And that this is a bit of a tenuous one, but that these economic inequalities need to be addressed. So it's not as simple as they are unequal. We need to essentially just wait for it to fix itself because capitalism will create equality in the end. Is saying actually no, we need to have some legislative reform, although they differ obviously on the extent of that reform. So let's think about disagree. I think this one might be a bit less tricky. How do feminists disagree on the economy? And I think this is more so going to be about the solution to these inequalities. So, what are their solutions to economic inequality?
So you've definitely given us some clues earlier on, haven't you, about the socialist feminism and how they might differ from some of the others. So that might be a route for people to think about, perhaps, as one of the answers.
Exactly. How can we address these inequalities?
Oh, Lucy's come in with something.
Do liberals just want change in laws, but socialists want a full change in capitalism and society as a whole? Perfect. I'm going to ignore do because that's a completely right answer. It's not a question. Completely true. Yeah. So liberals think that legislative change, so things like sex discrimination laws, will essentially mean that women have more equality in society because they can access jobs, as if there's not other ways that employers can kind of discriminate. And yeah, socialists see that the economy is the root of the problem. Capitalist economy needs to have women as a second class citizen because they act as a reserve army of labour. They're a pool of labour that can be tapped into as and when they're necessary. So, perfect answer, Lucy. Marta says, sorry?
I was just going to say, Marta made a very similar point and absolutely right as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's that key difference, right? It's like, do you overthrow the system or do you reform it? Does capitalism discriminate between men and women, or actually does capitalism inherently have issues in it that need to have sexism and patriarchy in order to maintain its power? So you can see those are very two key differences there. So perfect. Your answers were perfect, guys. Thank you. Okay, so let's think then about how could we do this. I'll talk kind of through an answer with you then. So it was to think about the question: to what extent do feminists agree on the role of the state? We think, okay, firstly, obviously, a good AO3 mark needs to have a strong opinion, and that strong opinion needs to feed through the essay, but you still have to have balance. So how do you kind of navigate balance and a strong opinion? And essentially, you have to argue that there's adaptation to feminism and there's abandonment to feminism. So there's points when they inherently disagree, but there is kind of some agreement. So if we're thinking about this idea of them agreeing on the role of the state, I would argue that they would abandon ultimately, but how can we say that in some ways there is an adaptation, that there's some differences in the sense that I think in the story of feminism, liberal feminism didn't go far enough in addressing inequalities. So later we have some adaptation to kind of try to create a fairer form of feminism as more people began to have more of a voice or be heard as a voice in society. So I think in terms of your criteria, a way that you can measure the extent to which they have adapted, so they've kind of agree then, you could argue that the state is patriarchal and that it's designed to benefit men. And I would say, again, the causes of inequality, the causes of the state creating inequality are similar across all four of the strands of feminism. So again, we're not supposed to kind of just talk about non-key thinkers, but we can't not mention Friedan because she is a really key liberal feminist. So we will mention her, but we will remember to mention at least two other key thinkers from the specification. So Friedan argues that the state is designed to benefit men when she talks about the problem with no name and the fact that women felt that they had no access to the public sphere, and the state reinforces that. The state reinforces that through things like laws, which essentially make it so that it's more difficult for women to go into the workforce. Laws which don't protect women in the workforce as well. So that's the state basically creates patriarchy. Millett also argues that essentially because politics is dominated by men, it essentially means that men create laws which further protect their power in society. So we can see a really clear agreement between these two thinkers. And of course, Hooks also argues the same thing, that the state is to benefit, obviously, not just men, but white men specifically. She talks about how essentially the state is not accessible for many women in society and that there needs to be kind of change in order to do that. But of course, in this bit, we're just talking about the causes in order to create that agreement. So talk about how they agree. And then when you go to your judgment, remember, we're going to argue abandon ultimately for this essay, right? So your judgment isn't going to go, therefore they agree. You're going to say, well, yes, there is some agreement on this, but the fact that essentially their solution to it is so far apart, we ultimately see that despite their agreements on the causes, their disagreement on the solution leads to too far of a disagreement in order for it to be a unified ideology. And then we can talk a bit more about abandon then. So this is a lot easier and a lot more fun because I like the ideologies questions because I feel like you're getting the thinkers to have a conversation, and conversations are a lot more exciting when people are arguing, I think, when you're watching, not taking part, of course. So they would definitely disagree on the solution. They would definitely disagree on the nature of a feminist state. So Friedan, to her, a feminist state in the way that she's portrayed in terms of this for this specification is this idea of a feminist state is one with legal reform in order to help women become equal or actually have equality of opportunity. So for liberal feminists, a feminist state is one where there is equal opportunity, where women have the opportunity to do well. However, that is a clear disagreement from Hooks because she would argue that, well, adjusting the state in order to have freedom for women is actually just saying freedom for white women. It's actually saying for freedom for white women from higher classes, higher class backgrounds, so that they have more access to society. So the perfect feminist state is one which is intersectional, where race, gender, class, sexuality, ability, and all the unique identities that people have are considered in order to have more equality in society. And for Hooks, this is done through things like education. So education is liberation to bell hooks, and creating more access through those things. Of course, to Millett, her feminist state is one which is a radically overthrown state, where in some ways we do have to be apart from men because they're not like who willingly ever gives up their power. She argues that in some ways some men are too far gone and we need to kind of construct our new society separate from patriarchy. And then Robotham is a really clear disagreement in the sense that the only state in order to address inequalities in society is a socialist state, because a socialist movement is already fairly strong. So it's better to ride off the back of that movement and make the socialist revolution successful, and within that, create a socialist society with the values of equality, but really work to educate the men who ultimately would rule that society, just like as we've seen historically. Educate those men not to dominate, but to have feminist thinking and create a more equal socialist society for women. And you go back to your judgment. So therefore, we can see clearly they might agree on the causes of inequality in terms of the role of the state and how the state oppresses women, but they fundamentally, and use really strong language, they fundamentally disagree on how do you resolve that. Because essentially, the idea of preserving a catalyst state and overthrowing it is just far too different to have any unity between the four strands of feminism. Okay, so I think we're over to you now, Duncan, for
Yeah.
a word search.
Oh, my favourite activity, word smash. I'm just
This
going to
is the
say
one
though,
I
that
love.
last that last bit is. I mean, those are going to be really meaty paragraphs, aren't they? If you can do all that, you're going to have really meaty paragraphs that are just ticking all those boxes for the assessment
Yeah,
objectives. So it's great stuff.
and
So those.
yeah, I was just
Sorry.
going to say, sorry, you made a good point. I forgot to say that, yes, I would say two really fat paragraphs. So you first start off with a 2 sentence introduction where essentially you're saying your opinion, right? What you're going to
Mhm.
argue and the two criteria you'll use. Two fat paragraphs in the middle, and because then that means that you're comparing the strands rather than just stating what each strand thinks. So compare as you go. That's the best idea. And then a very short conclusion where you kind of sum up what you're saying. So just
Yeah.
remember that compare as you go, talk about them together. Sorry, Duncan.
No, that's great. So we're just going to test a few key terms just to finish with using word smash. If you haven't joined us before with one of these, it's a bit like Answer Smash on Richard Osman's House of Games, although obviously not copied from that at all. But you get a picture and a clue. The picture isn't anything to do with feminism, but the clue or the question is, and you have to smash them together. So there you see an elephant, and which is the southernmost continent in the world. It's Antarctica, so you smash them together to Elephantarctica. So the end of the first words is the start of the answer to the main question. So here we have a picture, and we have a society dominated by, run by, and in the interests of men. So what do we think? Can anyone smash these two together to get us our answer? Who's the photo? Who's the picture of? What's the answer to the second clue? Smash them together. If you know the answer to the first one, you probably be able to work out who the person on the picture is. If you know who the person on the picture is, the end of that will give you a clue for the start of the answer to the clue. We've had a correct answer come in from tutor to you. It is postman patriarchy. Yes, it's postman Pat, and patriarchy, postman patriarchy. Okay, well done. So here we've got another one. The idea that men and women are fundamentally different. And my clue for this one is I'm just after the first name of the person in the photograph. That should make it a bit easier. Do we know who she is? Do we know what term is used to describe the idea that men and women are fundamentally different? I'm sort of saying fundamentally different to avoid saying the word that that is actually in the answer. Oh, if I stumped you. I thought these first two were the easy ones, but anyway, that's worrying. Anyway, that is Tess Staley, so it's Tess, and the answer to the clue was essentialism, so it's Tessentialism. Okay, let's look at the last one then. We've got an information board about a type of place, and we've got something that Kira referred to earlier. The idea that women are used as potential workers who benefit capitalism by keeping down wages, which is originally a Marxist idea and was applied specifically to women by socialist feminists. When Marx talked about it, he talked about it also about the unemployed and underemployed as well. What do we think the sort of area that is being advertised or given some information about on the left is? That might help, or you might just know the answer. If you know the answer to the clue, just type that in. That's the important bit, really. The smashing it together is just for fun. Any ideas?
Yeah, the clue we should know. I talked about it.
You did, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone got it? Everyone's being quiet now. You are. coming up with all these brilliant ideas for the proper questions. everyone's got a bit,
The serious
bit
stuff.
shy for this one. It is the Nature Reserve Army of Labour. So there's a picture of a nature reserve, and the term, which, as I said, Kira referred to earlier, was the Reserve Army of Labour. Oh, Anna got very close to it, the Reservation Army of Labour. Yeah, so it's a Reserve Army of Labour, and it's a nature reserve. Okay. So well done, and particularly well done with all your interacting with the earlier questions, and some absolutely fantastic exam gold in there as well for how to answer these
as always,
quite tricky essays.
Yeah, superb stuff. I think we were just having a chat before our session started today, thinking ahead to next term, particularly next half term, after once we get into 2022. And I think part of the live stream session, so please type your thoughts on this into the comments box once we've finished, might be around just sort of guiding our way through, maybe even worked examples of how to respond and how to build those arguments up in the way that Kira was leading us through there, because it's absolute gold dust in terms of how to structure a response. But yeah, fantastic stuff.
Great stuff. Yeah, we might have a few festive questions next time as well. Yeah, as it gets closer to Christmas. Yeah.
Why not? I'll bring the mince pies.
And wear a hat, Santa hat, maybe.
Yeah.
Superb stuff. Right, that's really good. Many thanks, and as always, to Kira from dialing in live. I say dialing in, making it sound like the internet was a bit dodgy. I mean, sorry.
I'm now using my phone's internet. That's how bad it is here.
But well, it was worth it. So many thanks to Kira from getting up early in Phoenix to join us, and to Duncan for getting up late or staying up late in Yorkshire. So we are. It's a regular slot here Monday 4:30s for our A-level politics revision session. So hopefully you can join us next week. Next week we've got our topical news panel. Who knows what will feature? Peppa Pig, CBI. Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
But that's for next week. We'll have our discussion panel, and then I think the week after next we are moving to nationalism. I think that's on the schedule for the non-core ideologies, and so quite how we'll do some festive questions in that. I don't know. Or true. Maybe we combine nationalism and anarchism and just do whatever we want to do. Who knows?
We could do, yeah. All right. Okay.
Superb stuff. Many thanks for everyone who's joined us live. If you found it useful, as always, give it a thumbs up. And if you watch on replay, hopefully you've had a chance to work through those activities. We'll catch you soon. In fact, in a week's time. So see you later.
See you. Bye-bye.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.